أهلا وسهلا بكم في بودكاست كلام من القلب. معاكم حنان الشهري والمعلم العظيم مارك جروفر. And I'm going to say that in English. Hi, Mark. The way I describe you is you're everyone's true friend on the internet. You're able to share the most difficult and painful things when we need to hear it. You are a saving grace, the one that holds the torch at the end of the dark tunnel. A speaker, a writer, a motivator, creator, collaborator, connector, lover, the founder of Create the Love, and Mind, a mental health app, the world's first social and emotional network, a human connection specialist, a soon-to-be father, and the founder of the Mark Groves podcast, and just a kind, inspiring human. Welcome to the podcast, Mark Groves.
Well, thank you for having me. What a generous and kind introduction. Everyone's friend. I'm like, I should send that to the people who DM me who don't seem like my friend.
You're their friend, even if they're not ready to see it just yet.
Right? They just don't know that we're best friends. Yeah.
They just don't know we're besties. How are you on a scale of 1 to 10? I usually start all my podcasts that way.
Yeah. How am I on a scale of 1 to 10?
Like truthfully.
Yeah, no, I don't know another way. I'm probably a 6 and rising.
Ooh, I'm a 6. Like. I'm a 6 today. Go on.
Yeah, like the last 3 years have been really tough. I think for everybody. And I'm Canadian, so in Canada things were not very easy. I think from a psychological sense, it's been really traumatizing for many reasons. For me, my thoughts are due to the way that governments and public health have handled COVID has been really, in my opinion, not healthy. It's been manipulative and exploitive of fear. And so that's been hard to witness. And, I don't think any human can sustain a suspended state in uncertainty and fear. And so I think for me, a lot of that has been, last year was very hard. But now I feel that, I've got my practices and my rituals in, and I'm, really feeling connected to the earth. I'm feeling connected to myself, and I can feel a rise of hope and possibility and all that. I feel like you're right after we're in the cocoon, which I felt like I've been in a cocoon for a little bit. There's been a reorganization and a reimagination of who I want to be and what I want to do in the world. So I'm a 6, but I'm on the way up. I'm going to be a 7 soon, and then an 8. I don't know what's going to shift all those things, but I know my daily practices of exercise and meditation are really, they're key for that. And
you visited Hawaii. You were in Maui. That's
man, it was so amazing.
That's like, I can imagine.
Yeah, when we got there, we had a descendant of the royal family, an indigenous guy who was just incredible, Elijah, and we did a ritual to ask the islands to participate in our healing, and it was incredible. It was so cool. And I know that you're part Hawaiian, so
my mom's family descends from the royal family as well, by the way.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, so like the next time you're doing, I'm 100% in. Just know that.
Oh yeah, I got to get back there because Hawaii as a place is just so nourishing. It's such an incredible place.
Thank you for answering these questions so beautifully. Well, I've listened to, I think, every single podcast. I've attended 2 of your programs, Codependency No More, or Codependent No More, and Rediscover Your Wholeness. And oh my gosh, like specifically rediscovering your wholeness. This 30-day program literally unpeeled so much within me. But specifically I want to talk about, if you don't mind, I just want to dive right in.
Go right in. Let's do it.
The concept of self-sabotage. Like the way you were discussing it, or the way you shared it, was so fascinating. And the way you even spoke about it, you're like, actually you said the more aware we get, the more our self-saboteur becomes even more stronger, or smarter.
Stronger or smarter. Yeah, the more awareness that we breathe, the more that we understand our own depth, the more tricks and strategies we can have to avoid it or to not go deeper. Because, ultimately, even when you heal childhood patterns or patterns in relationship that have been around for your whole life, but, more recently you recognize them probably in romantic relationships, then what's beyond that is unknown. What's beyond that is something you've never witnessed in a relationship. I often think to myself in my relationship with Kylie that I don't have a map. I don't actually know the way beyond, which is really beautiful in one sense, because it means that I've hit the upper limit of my knowledge, like I'm learning as I'm going. And the other side of that is that it's scary, because what we associate with more depth is more pain. And if we don't know how to alchemize our pain, or we don't know how to turn pain into transformation, we'll avoid going deeper. And humans are brilliant at figuring out ways to not move towards pain, which is smart, right? Like that's a beautiful survival strategy, but I often say that where the thing you are most afraid of dwells is also where the thing you most want lives too. So, that's the strange paradox of love.
Oh, I love that a lot. I'm just going to sit with that for a bit. Because what was so interesting when your prompts are so powerful in general, like in every course, or even like when your posts on Instagram. And the questions were very triggering when I was doing the self-sabotage. I was just like, what? And even when I go back to it every now and then, it's so interesting because like I have new ways. And I'm just so curious to know, like, what are ways that Mark could be sabotaging himself?
Oh man. Yeah, I got all the tricks too, It's that's the beauty of witnessing oneself. And I think the recognition that you're always the student, you have to live that, or else you'll get hit upside the head by the universe or God or whatever your word is. And mine is often self-neglect, moving out of my disciplinary rituals, when I'm going through change or stress or transformation, which I'm sure people have experienced a lot of, especially in the last couple of years. Those are usually the things that go out the window first. And I even know that consciously. I teach that. And sometimes they go out for me, and then I have to bring them back in. I have to remind myself too that, you will, if you're paying attention, notice small deviations from integrity and alignment and what feels good. But usually we're not paying attention to the small deviations. We usually wait till we're sick, or we've put on weight, or, we're stressed out. All these things that are really become really symptoms of a lack of balance, a lack of self-care.
Honestly, like I totally relate, and I have all the rituals and I know all the stuff, but what do you think happens? Like, what makes us drop the ball on these things?
It's easier to turn towards things that feel good immediately. Like it's easier to turn towards even an addiction to TikTok or Instagram or Twitter or whatever people's technological addiction is. It's easier to turn towards that. It's easier to drink a drink. It's easier to do a drug. It's easier to have casual encounters. All those things are easier than sitting in your stuff, eating sugar. Like sugar is the thing that I used to use as a kid to soothe. And so it's really easy for me to do that as an adult. But I think it's because, it's hard to sit in stress. It's hard to sit in pain. It's hard to sit in chaos. And knowing that, right? I know that the proper solution is meditation, is exercise, is balanced food, like healthy, nutritious food. I think of what IIN, the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, talks about nourishment in every area of your life. So I think we know the solutions. We know the path. We know how to get better. We know how to lose weight. We know how to get into alignment. We know how to, generally I'd say we know how to quit the things we're addicted to. Or we know how to find resources to help us because they're everywhere. but yet there's all these ways that people, companies, systems monetize our disconnection from ourselves and market to them.
Mark, do you know what your human design is?
Oh man, I do, but I don't.
Are you a generator? Because I tried to search your birth information online. I didn't get all the information.
I believe I am a generator.
Yeah, I think you're a generator.
I think that's right.
And Kylie's a manifester, so I'm a manifester as well.
You are?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's definitely a manifester.
Oh, she's definitely a manifester. So the way I have these questions, the upcoming questions, they're kind of like a little bit relational, a little bit work, a little bit personal. And I'm going to start with a relational question.
Let's do it. How
did you know Kylie was the one?
Someone asked me that yesterday. I don't get asked that a lot. I didn't. I think that's the truth of all relating, is that saying that is a romantic ideal. It's really beautiful, and it can be the way that we put into words the experience of connection and the belief in a future. I don't tend to use words the one, because I think what it does is sort of create scarcity, and also it can often make it so we're not willing to then leave something if it's not healthy because they're the one, right? And so they might be the one that teaches us to leave things that aren't healthy. They might, but how did I know that she was someone I wanted to build a life and a family with? I was saying to this person who asked me yesterday that we met on Instagram. And this is a long time ago. I think it was like 8 years ago. I slid into her DMs, and back then you had to send a picture to send someone a DM. So I sent a sunset from the top of a mountain, and we just vibed. We connected. She came and visited in Vancouver a month later. And when I picked her up at the airport, I was like, yeah, it was the first time being in person with her, experiencing her. On a cellular level, not a cellular, digital level. The way that I navigate relating and dating is that my thought was, I want to see her again. That's all I knew, is that I wanted to see her again, and I wanted to learn more about her. And that stays true to today. Till then, we did break up for a couple of years ago, as you know.
That podcast, oh my gosh.
I've never even re-listened to it because that podcast was so hard.
The year,
yeah,
the ache. Wasn't there an ache?
Oh yeah, there was just true human suffering, but it was so beautiful. I was watching a video of, I'm recreating my breakup course, just updating it and doing it a bit differently. And I was watching a video that I did in September of 2019 when we broke up. And in the video, I was saying that, clearly I've been going through a few things, but that I was just so present to the amount of love that was there, that the grief I was experiencing was really actually evidence of how much I loved and how open I was and how much I cared. So I didn't see it as something I wanted to get rid of, because it was something to celebrate. And I didn't know how to do that previously. I'm sure you've heard me say that a lot of the grief I experienced in that time was grief that I hadn't processed from previous relationships. So yeah, there was a genuine ache, the kind of, that can only be described in a Adele song, I think, or something like that.
Oh yeah, Adele can definitely be tuned in.
Oh my
perfectly.
God. She can get you. She can get you.
I love how you even said the one, how you don't like that word, but you sharing that on the podcast, and we don't hear enough of this.
No, we don't get to see someone in their pain. And I think, the reason we had very different processes, Kylie and I. She went very internal. And I did, but I really wanted to share my process with people, just so, I think I wanted it, from a healing perspective, I wanted to turn it into something that would liberate other people. And I think when we see other people, much like sad music, sad music reminds us that other people are sad too. And I think when someone can witness someone else, and it doesn't have to be me, it could be anybody, and we've seen that in other people sharing. But when we can witness someone else who's suffering, it almost gives us permission to suffer ourselves, because most of us, and I think this is very true culturally, is depending on the culture, is there's not a lot of acceptance of grief or anger, and there's a lot of shame associated with relational endings, especially in cultures that say that's not okay, or your value goes down if your relationship ends. And that's such a strange thing to navigate. Although it's probably less pronounced in Canada, it's still present because, religion infiltrates itself into culture. Mm-hmm. They're hard to distinguish, actually, a lot of the time. But the strange thing is that you can feel more loved and connected to yourself and by yourself by the choice you make to leave a relationship or end one. And yet you can feel a total lack of belonging and a lack of admiration and love from your culture, your religion, and the people around you. And that is actually a really painful experience to hold, but it's really important. And I say that because what occurs in that deeper pain in not belonging or breaking a cultural norm or a doctrine of religion is that you actually see that what you were taught may not have actually been in alignment with your true values. And there's something very liberating about that if we're willing to sit in that, because then we start, and it can be a can of worms, because if you're like, oh wait, so leaving a relationship and choosing myself is one of the most liberating feelings I've ever felt. I love myself and I'm proud of myself. Yet these people around me are saying they don't love me and they're not proud of me. You can either try to go back to getting compliance and applause from them and maintaining belonging, but it's really not belonging.
Yeah.
Or you can sit in this sense of establishing the place where you are the source of self-worth, and then you're free. Although that can sound kind of trite because, of course, you're not always free depending on where you are. And you're not always free to make those choices. But when we can internally be present to them, then, I think of Viktor Frankl's work, and he wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, and he's a psychotherapist, I believe, or maybe a psychiatrist. But he wrote his books from the experience of having gone, during Nazi Germany as a Jew. And he said that was the ultimate form of liberation, like the recognition that no one gets to choose your thoughts or how you orient in the face of suffering. And I remember hearing that quote that to live is to suffer, but to survive is to find meaning in your suffering. And I didn't really understand that when I first heard it, but I really do understand it now.
This is not a question. I'm just curious. Are you thinking of writing a book?
Yeah, Kylie and I are actually writing a book first, and then I'll go down the solo.
Oh my gosh, talk about bestseller everywhere and the whole everything.
I'm excited to write it with her, yeah. We've already started it, but yeah, we're pumped.
Wow. How has your answers changed to when people love me, they
love me. They love me back. They choose me. That's a big shift for me.
When people love me, they love me, you said, and they choose me. And then when I love people, they
choose me. Because I think those two questions are so powerful at recognizing the truth of our upper limits. Because that's ultimately the story we're trying to avoid and not recreate. And thank you for asking them again. Because I haven't been asked that or thought about that. But in the coming back together and the breaking apart, and then the coming back together, that now is a sense of self-trust. That even if they didn't choose me, to be honest, everything would be totally okay now. I have no, I have no reservations of trusting myself and knowing that everything's going to be okay, even when it feels like it's not. I think that was the guiding light, even when we broke up, is I was in the deepest pain that I was sober to feel. I previously drank my way through breakups, but I always had just like a northern light that I knew that this was breaking me, but it was actually freeing me.
Wow, it wasn't breaking, it was freeing me. Come on, Mark, this is going to get a big quote on the... Wow. Well, we're going to scoot on to it's a one-word question. You moved jobs a lot. You changed careers. You were in marketing, you were in tech, and then you were in pharmaceuticals. That was the last. How long were you
I was a salesperson at an electronics store, which I don't know if you guys have like a Best Buy, but
something similar, yeah.
Yeah, so in Canada we had one called Future Shop, and I worked there during after high school and in college, and then I became a pharmaceutical rep.
So how long were you a pharmaceutical rep?
Long time, 14 years.
Wow, I didn't know it was 14. I thought it was like 5, 6. That's a lifetime.
No, I was embedded in the machine. Yeah, I was.
Then how did you know that this chapter is done?
You know, when I started that job, I was very, even before that, I was very interested in human behavior, in relationships. Not necessarily romantic as much. I mean, I used to talk to my dad about them all the time, about my own relationships. And he was great to chat with because he would ask me lots of hard questions and make me think about how I was showing up. And he really has such a line of integrity that it was beautiful to always have his reflections, as well as my mom's. But mainly him and I talked about those things. And I was in sales. I studied how to manipulate people, how to get people to change behavior. I loved studying that kind of stuff. Like, how do you get someone to switch products, you know? How do you get someone to change, you know, in the context of pharma, their prescribing habits? And then when I went through a breakup in my late 20s, I thought to myself, like, why am I so good at talking about everything but my feelings? I was very successful as a pharmaceutical rep. I thought that doesn't make sense. Like, I should be good at all relationships. And I started to study them because I felt pain in myself when I was alluding to earlier about this feeling you can feel more chosen by you and then not chosen by people around you, or not celebrated, which is a weird inverse relationship to hold, or paradox to hold. And so I started to study relationships. I started to study the psychology of them. Why do they start? Why do they finish? Why do some people stay together and hate each other and other people stay together and deepen love? I felt like no one was really telling the truth about love. You know, that was, 12 years ago that I started writing. I went back to school, studied positive psychology, and then I started writing. I started writing about what I was learning about myself, about love, but mainly oriented to me, like the things that I felt ashamed of, the things that I didn't do well. And I knew it was time to leave when, you know, I was feeling like I was going to die if I stayed in that job. You know, there was, I had to leap, you know, but I had to leap from a very secure job to, I'm not an entrepreneur. I have no idea how to even do any of that. Like, it's such a change from having money in your bank every month from a job to not, you know, it's such a leap. But it was about more of the same thing of killing the story that I was taught and breaking the agreements that society makes or desires or pressures you to agree to. When I ended that relationship that led me to want to study relationships, that was the first time that I got sort of disconnected from the story, you know, from the story of expectation. And I think all of us have it, you know, where our society says get married by a certain age, do this kind of job. This is what it means to be a woman or a man or a good wife or a good husband or whatever it is. And I was kind of at the place where I was like, fuck it. Fuck all of it. Like, I don't want to be good anymore. I don't want, it's just such a painful thing to know that you have all these dreams and desires birthing from you, usually from your pain. And we stay suspended in expectation and seeking the applause of other people. And I remember saying to my boss, she was incredible, just this incredible lady, so supportive of my growth and what I wanted to do. And I said to her, look, I'm going to leave in April. And it was December. I said, April 1st is my last day. And she's like, why are you telling me now? Why don't you just tell me like a month before? I was like, well, I want to give you time to prepare. And she's like, all right, well, so she came back to me. I talked to the president and he wants you to stay till June if you can. And I just like sat there and I was like, I can't. Like I was like, I'll die. And you know, it's such a weird thing to think that you could be in a job that people want or desire when you're living a life you're taught to want that's very different than a life you want. And I continue to feel those splits that are about continuing to heal the layers, the masks, the performance, the identities. You know, I was reading a quote earlier that it said, and you've probably heard it, but it said, to love someone long-term is to attend 1,000 funerals of the people they used to be. And I thought, oh man, I think that about ourselves.
Wow.
You know, to live is to attend 1,000 funerals of ourselves. And so I think that was it. It was a death. And I remember crying when it ended, and that came out of nowhere. I was just sitting on my patio and all of a sudden my whole identity had to just melt. And I was just coming to terms with that. And I just started crying. Like Kylie has said to me about endings, let it be a good death. And I think about that a lot, about endings. You know, it makes me emotional to think about because, you know, all these things are asking to die, and it's like, can we let them go with grace? And I don't know that we tend to, because we have such a fear of death. We have such a culture that avoids death. You know, look at the things that are marketed to us. It's about maintaining youth or power or both. And that really makes it so we can't even let go of small deaths, you know, things like identity. And, so I left and here we are.
But it's so crucial because something that we struggle with in the Middle East a lot is when I quit my job, I had a corporate job and it was like the dream job. And it's huge, the third largest food company in the world. Like, why would you leave that?
Yeah.
And literally my dad, because I'm 34 now, but at the time I was 25, 26. And I know this sounds maybe like very foreign to people in the West, but like it is not an option not to ask permission from your parents when you're doing such. You're living with them till you're married anyway, so you're underneath this somewhat definitely patriarchal, definitely. But like my dad was very frank, like he was like, Hanan, if you do this, I will not speak to you anymore. Like I'm cutting, like it's not like I was financially dependent on him in any way or shape or form, but I lived underneath his roof and he didn't speak to me for a year. And I had to deal with that,
It's painful.
It is. And I feel like the more we talk about it, like it is not rainbows and butterflies. Like we obviously know that, but there is this sense of leaning into this unknown, and this unknown could have pain.
It will have.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing. And, you know, I can't imagine what that was like to go through. When I left my pharma job, my dad said to me, why don't you just take a leave of absence?
Yeah, that's the same thing he said to me. Yeah.
I said to him, well, that's like saying I don't believe that I'm going to succeed. You know, I can go get a job any day. I knew that. I could go interview and get a job. But, you know, there's something about the calling of purpose that, you know, I believe that it can be love, it can be purpose, it can be something. But you have to find something that matters more to you than the approval of your parent, then that will get you through the pain of the severance. Because to say like, just, you know, screw your dad, just leave your job. You're breaking so many systems, like your body, the generations of healing that occur in that choice. So I acknowledge you so much for the courageous actions you continue to take.
Thank you for that. Like I was like, Dad, by the way, this is Mark Groves, and he quit his job. He was in pharma, you know.
It's like he's a white guy from Canada.
But it's like it's interesting because like you said, I'm like, Dad, but I can get a job. But it's what I call in Arabic. It's like this crown that is given to, like, it's like handed down from the parents to their children. Like, this is what I'm afraid of, and I'm actually giving it to you. I'm afraid that you'll fail.
My baggage.
Yeah. I'm afraid that you'll fail. I'm afraid that I knew my dad grew up poor, and like we are definitely like middle class, and nobody quits their job to teach yoga when yoga was illegal. Nobody does that,
right?
You know.
Like, so, and then, like,
who do you think you are? It's like, who do you think you are? So So it was. We're almost 10 years later, but that was one of the most intense, and it came a lot up for me in the Rediscover Your Wholeness. Like, there is this bit of me, as much as like I want to expand and be seen, I do feel there is this something still pulling me back, and it is fear. It
makes
fear
sense.
Yeah.
You know, it's generational. Like, think about the first woman in your lineage who laid it down, you know, who, like, that was probably the previous experience of the lineage. And so there was one where all of a sudden, silence, right? Control, silence. So when you want to be loud, be big, be dreamy, be all those things, you know, you have to remember, for most people too, the imprint that creates silence in a family is usually violence, is usually pain, is usually murder, is usually, you know, think about the burning of the witches, you know, we have been historically, and still are, very afraid of feminine power, you know, because we believe on a patriarchal system, depending on the shape of it, there is a belief that for women to have power, it means there's an absence of power in the man. But really, you know, in true balance, when power is sourced from self and from dreams and from passions, there's no exchange. Like, if you are more powerful and we're in a relationship, I'm more powerful. Those are old systems, you know, old systems that we could say are evolutionarily created and served us to get us here because they're here, but they don't serve us anymore. And, you know, and to be willing to walk through the fire of that type of experience, you know, I think about it a lot of, you know, this idea that when you want to leap, you know, when I wanted to leave that job, it was like, I don't know what the other side of leaving looks like. I just know I need to leave. But, you know, that's the thing about making any choice, is that you can only measure the things you're going to lose because they are currently in your hand. But you can't see what you're going to gain. You can't see what light and alignment. And, you know, think about how many people you've inspired from inspiring yourself. And you can't even imagine that then, because when you look at the beliefs and the upper limits that generations hand down, they were told it wasn't possible, or they truly had to scrape to survive. And that might be true too now. And so the idea of, you know, in Australia, they call it tall poppy syndrome. This idea that, who are you to be a tall poppy? Who are you to stand above the rest? You know, but it's not hierarchical. It's energetic, you know, and it makes other people realize the limits they live by. And so it's often easier to put someone back in a box than break out of our own, which is sad. But, you know, when we refuse to get back in the box, then they're like, shit, I guess I better figure out how to make this work or say goodbye. And that's the pain of human evolution. You know, we have to be willing to lose relationships to discover, come home to ourselves.
I feel your work is so profound, and it came to me in the exact time. I share your work in all my retreats and all my programs and everything, literally.
Thank you.
And because there is this huge shift that is happening, there is this transformation that is happening. And I am, aside from being so here for it, there is a lot of like, oh my gosh, all this shift, like what, it's like anything that we were standing on is no longer the ground that we're standing on. It's like everything is breaking apart, and there is this shift happening. And it's so phenomenal to see women stepping into their power the way they are.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
like, but it is scary, and it's like half, and the why I referenced that you're the light at the end of the tunnel, it's because halfway mid-tunnel, you're like, is there even light at the end of this tunnel? Am I even at the right,
great.
you know, like, you know, and in the Middle East, we don't talk a lot about our failures, about our pain. We kind of like hide and we show like, no, we're fine. And it comes in different ways. We believe the story that we're telling quite often. You know what I mean? The mind is brilliant that way. Like, if I keep saying I'm great, and when I'm not, it's this facade that I'm living in, and it's not the truth anymore. And I know it's not the truth, but it's like I'm trying to force fit this thing that is obviously just not. It's not fitting. It's not the truth. So I felt like you sharing your story, and just I know we come from different backgrounds, and but it's still very inspiring to hear that, you know, it is difficult. It's shit. It's shit sometimes.
It absolutely is. And I think the thing that the internet has created, you know, on top of many things, but they talk about, you know, when, like, for example, Bitcoin is the decentralization of power, you know, money. And the idea is that democracy is the decentralization of power, but I think that's probably arguable. And that the internet is really the decentralization of consciousness, right? Like wisdom. And the one thing that the internet has allowed is for us to see possibility and other ways of being, and access to brilliance and teachers and wisdom, ancient wisdom from different cultures, and also ways of relating, you know, because I think often in, like, let's say Canada, if you grew up in a small town with 150 people, and then the natural tendency is to marry, you know, one of the 5 available people in your age range. And then all of a sudden you go on a trip to New York or Dubai, and all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, like there's so many
there's so much
people. And right. Like, so your options increase, but also you start to see that perhaps deeper alignment is available. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that I've experienced, is just this really beautiful, constant exposure to expansion of what's possible. And, you know, although we have different cultural shapings, and humans love, it doesn't matter where you go, we have a desire for safety, love, and connection, deeply wired. But we also have a deep desire for authenticity. And when relationships can celebrate authentic self-expression, they're free. When they don't, when that costs you the relationship, then you're not free. You know, and that's something that, whether it's as explicitly obvious as in your culture, that you need approval from a parent, I was seeking approval from my parents in the leaving of my job. But it was definitely more culturally acceptable for me to disobey, you know?
Yeah.
And the cost though can be that we no longer have a relationship. A lot of people get divorced and all of a sudden their family's like, sorry, you're no longer valuable. You brought shame upon the family. And I'm like, you just brought liberation on the family. Like, you're the most inspiring person in the family. They should be coming to you for advice. Like, how do we not end up with a relationship ending? We should go learn from people.
Yeah. But where, you know what, as much as the internet has its obvious downfalls, but like, I'm so grateful for it, because I didn't grow up with having access to role models that I can see. And you've done a podcast with Lacey Phillips, and
yeah, I have. Yeah.
So I've done so much of her work, and it's played a huge role in my life, and
she's great.
She's amazing. And I was on her podcast, and it was so interesting because while we were talking, I just felt like, what the biggest realization is, like, needing somebody that has similar background to me. Like, I need this to be more closer to home, you know, for me to feel like it's accessible, that this is an option for me as well. It's amazing that I see a blonde, blue-eyed woman climbing Mount Everest. That's great. But when I see, you know, like an Arab woman with she might have had the same obstacles, like similar obstacles than mine. It seems a bit more like, oh, closer to home. I can do it.
It's possible, you know? Right?
Yeah, it's possible.
I agree. That's we need to see people who are walking a similar path walk it, and maybe just be a chapter ahead, a book ahead. And that's why sharing our story is so powerful. You know, not from a place of approval seeking, but from a place of hey, I wish I had known this. You know, I think of the people who left jobs and started careers. I mean, you just have to hear enough stories of possibility and success that you might take the leap. And think about now, or actually it doesn't even matter the context. People start speaking out against main narratives or main ways of being or the status quo when other people start speaking out, because their risk is less. People watching other people do it, when enough people, it's like speaking out against anything. When people start speaking out, it makes it less risky for other people to speak out.
Yes.
And that's really ultimately what sharing our story does, is it gives people multiple options of paths, but also evidence it's possible.
We're going to scoot on over to personal now. This is from my best friend, Nada. What was the hardest thing to admit to and work on?
What a good question, Nada. The hardest thing to admit to and work on. I'd say that when I started to do the work and look at relationships and who I was being, because really that relationship I ended in my late 20s, I really started to look at, what do I really want from life? Who do I want to be? What am I creating? Because what I'm creating is not in alignment with, and who I'm being is not necessarily in alignment with my true values, the values that are sourced from my soul. I'd say the hardest part to admit was that I was out of integrity. That the way I was being was out of integrity. But it was also the most liberating, because all of a sudden I could be like, yeah, like I've done that. I'm doing that. I'm doing this. I don't want to do those things anymore. And that felt so relieving, just knowing that.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do those things. Like I didn't have to run from the truth of those things. I could hold the grief of accepting who I'd been. I could hold the shame. But like I like to quote Francis Weller, like, let it cook you. And it cooked me. And it changed me. And it deepened me, because all those patterns really come from pain, or the avoidance of pain. So I got to turn towards it.
Wow. This question's from my husband. How would you describe the transition from boy to man? Like, what does it entail?
What a beautiful question, husband. What's your husband's name?
Haytham.
Haytham.
Yes, good job.
I do Arabic on the side. No, I definitely don't. That transition. In our culture, there's not necessarily a transition for boys to men. And I think that's actually a failure of our culture and our families. In some cultures, it's things like circumcision at 13 or something. That sounds like a horrible idea. I don't think anyone needs to go through that. We could probably just, go out into the forest. We don't have to lose the tip of our ding dong. There's probably better strategies. True. But, one thing that Esther Perel said that I really loved is she said that, when a girl menstruates, there's an initiation into being a woman. And I don't think we can count a wet dream as that for a boy, but because there's not a transition, often boys, we become adults who are really adolescents, who are really boys. And I think you see that what we might call toxic masculinity is really unintegrated trauma, unintegrated pain, and it's immature masculinity. There's a tribe that when the boys turn a certain age, I think it's around 13, they paint them all black. And then when they walk around the village, they're to be ignored. And what happens then is they celebrate that, I think it's that night, and it is their death, the death of them as children. And then they're given a new name, and they are now men, and they're responsible for the village. They're responsible for the family. And that transition from boy to man, I think really that, the hard part is you were talking about cultural things. Well, a lot of the power dynamics with parents and in cultural structures like yours, and even unconsciously or implicitly in Canadian, U.S. culture, European cultures, is that there's still an infantilization of the child. The parent often maintains power through the through parenthesizing. So one of the initiations is to choose oneself, to step into oneself, to take responsibility for oneself. And often the structures don't necessarily allow that. So sometimes it's actually the rebellion against the structure. The other side, I think, as men, is actually taking full responsibility for our lives and getting into integrity with what our true values are, making our way through the world with empathy and kindness and respect, and also a ferocity, a ferocity that's necessary. We need to know that we have our own back, but our partners and our families need to know that we have their back too. And I think that journey from boy to man probably happened very late in my life. Truly, I think the real initiation, one was stepping in, leaving that relationship. The second one was leaving my job. And the third one was leaving the relationship with Kylie. Yeah. So I think it's been a maturation process, and I'm sure I have more to do. But I wouldn't say it was till I really knew I deeply trusted myself. And that was really solidified in leaving the relationship with Kai.
Wow. What do you do when you're experiencing an overwhelming, maybe emotional flooding, if you will?
Well, that's where all the tools, that's where the tools work. I used to shut down or get defensive. Sometimes I still get a bit defensive. There's always a little lingering trigger response in, I think, everybody, and that's not a sign that we haven't done the work, but, that there's more healing to do and more curiosity to step into. Practices like meditation have really helped that, because I can observe the flooding rather than try to protect it. Because ultimately the flooding comes from the nervous system's response of wanting to protect. So we might go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Yeah. And mine is either to freeze or to fawn. And so I now recognize flooding as information. And then I have to ask myself, what behavior in this moment do I need in order to get regulated? What would a behavior in this moment, what would be a behavior that would contribute to this connection? How could I be curious? Now, let me tell you, that's not fun.
The curious part.
That's not fun, because when you do that, you have to sit in the space of what you've normally protected. Yeah. And you likely will recreate your relationship patterns and your fights and everything, because we're not willing to go to the curious space that exists in the trigger. Because we talked about earlier, like, you're really avoiding recreating pain, but you actually keep recreating pain. So the only way to change is to actually choose something different in the flood. The other thing that's really helped me, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about, is cold showers, cold plunging. It doesn't get better. I'm telling you,
every single time I open up Instagram, everybody is Joe Rogan, Russell Brand. Everybody has their ice tubs. It's freezing in Canada in general. So, right?
Yeah, if you went outside in the cold right now, the tub would be way colder than, outside would be way colder than the tub. It would freeze. In Canada right now, it is where I'm from, which I'm not there right now, because fuck that. It's minus 47 with wind chill.
Minus 47. We're complaining over minus
Celsius.
4 here.
Oh, yeah. It's like been the coldest start to winter in 100 years in Calgary. Oof. I know. Well, that's not for Arabic skin.
No, not for us.
No,
we have all the heaters on and our sweaters on, and it's 9-7 today. But
oh God, yeah. For us, we're like, get out of here. We're like,
let's go tanning at a 9 and 7.
Yeah, right.
And maybe the last question that I'll end this podcast with is, what is home for you?
I've experienced a lot of that question, so apropos, because I've experienced a lot of movement in the last couple of years, trying to find home in a literal building. Bought a home in Canada and planned on our dream spot on an acreage, and then all the stuff happened in Canada, and I was like, I don't want to be here. And that was a weird feeling, have about one's home, which I'm sure lots of people can relate to. And I just keep recognizing that if I believe home is in a place, then I will always search for it. You know, and I say that I'm emotional thinking about that because I've been doing that. You know, and it's been this constant wound of not being able to settle, not being able to be in one place. But in doing that, I'm not getting to be. I'm having more awarenesses about this because of just what I've been through in the last while, and I'm sure lots of people can relate. But I'm recognizing it's in what I create. You know, it's like someone said to me the other day that asked if I hated the Prime Minister of Canada. And I was like, no, I don't hate. It's just someone who represents something, you know, anyway, so it's useless to hate them. But I was like, I don't even know how to hold that emotion because it robs you of peace. But grief and anger have been present a lot in the last bit. I was listening to Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Becoming Supernatural. And he said that no human can stay in suspended uncertainty for a long period. And I thought, oh my God, like we've all been in that. Some people their whole lives.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, when I let my external environment dictate how I feel internally, I am hijacked. That's the exact purpose of propaganda. That's the exact purpose of fear. And I'm like, man, how many epigenetic markers have I turned on in the last 2 years? And I was thinking all of this as I was mountain biking. And then I thought, well, if I can turn them on with the intensity of fear and anger, then I can actually turn on really good ones with the intensity of love and presence and hope. And I thought, you know, it's time to be done with the fighting and orient a different way. So I say all of that to really say that home, I think, is found through a collection of habits and choices. But it really is an internal landscape that I'm not the first to say I'm well versed in, but I am. I recognize that you have to keep peeling the layers to get to it, or to, you know, there's that saying that when someone asked, who carved Michelangelo, or David? Is it Michelangelo?
I think Michelangelo.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's a history buff who's like, oh my God, how do you not know that? But they said, how did you do that? And the artist said, he was always there. I just chipped away what wasn't him.
Wow. What?
And I think that's very true of us, you know?
Wow. I don't know what's my favorite part of the podcast. Like everything, it seems like it's a quote. Wow. Thank you for showing up the way that you show up always. Like you never not show up 100% ever. And it's so beyond inspiring. It's just so expansive. And it's like, you show me what's possible. And thank you so much for doing the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for constantly paving the way for the rest of us, because it's not easy. It's just not.
Well, thank you. I receive all of your words so fully and your love and mirror that love right back. I appreciate you and I love you right back. And
you guys definitely do. You must attend one of Mark's programs. You must listen to his podcast.